Hi, Gerard, are you there?
Yes, John, I'm here now. Yeah.
All right.
How did you solve that?
I went in via D71 and not me personally.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay.
So you're there and you've got access. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm there, and we can both hear each other, so we will to, I'm sure, convey our message to the audience also.
Okay, that's good.
Or you changed the program quality director. Yeah, fine. Okay.
Well, I did the American program as well, because that's how they put it, don't they? Not the double.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8 o'clock, so
yeah,
I guess we could make a start. We've got a few people online, so
very good. Yeah, good wishes.
Okay, I will do the introductions and then hand over to you.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and many thanks for coming on the call. Can I wish you all a happy new year and offer you my best wishes for a healthy, successful and fulfilling 2020. I'm John Cox, the District 71 Director, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for this evening, who is Gerard Mannix, our Programme Quality Director. I will also be facilitating any questions and chipping in from time to time. We will be taking questions throughout the hour, and I suggest that you type them into the box at the bottom of the control panel. I've long thought that one of our biggest challenges is the training of club and district officers. At the best, we get 1 or 2 days training, and we're probably 3/4 of the way through the year before we feel comfortable in the role and know roughly what we should be doing. The success of our clubs is undoubtedly in the hands of our club officers, and in the 13 years that I've been a member, I've seen our clubs go through highs and lows as a direct result of the skills and talent of our officers. So what can we do to improve? Training is critical, yet time is so short that can we do more training online? Toastmasters International are introducing online courses that officers will need to attend prior to club officer training. I believe that will be coming in sometime this year. We as a district can run more critical club leadership topics, such as growing membership, the Distinguished Club Programme, pathways, moments of truth, etc. So I'm pleased that Gerard, in his capacity of Programme Quality Director, has taken the bull by the horns and is running this session tonight for trainers. Having spent most of my working career delivering workshops for business owners, company directors and managers, I understand the importance of programme design, being clear about learning outcomes, understanding the audience wants and needs, and keeping them engaged and entertained. So I look forward to hearing from Gerard tonight. So welcome, Gerard, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Well done. As John said, I wish everybody a happy new year and a successful Toastmaster next 6 months anyway, before we close off on the 30th of June. John, may I have the first slide, please? Now we're doing Train the Trainer, and the synopsis of this is that we actually need to reach out to people to guide them and to give them a growth pattern with regard to training, how to train people to be trainers in their own right. Now, my own personal experience of this was, during my career, my job was a dentist, and we had workshops or tutorials 1 a month, and maybe one would have 1 a year or 2 a year, depending on the rota and roster of that. But when I was speaking and presenting to my colleagues, I found that very, very easy. Then I was appointed by University College Cork to teach and to demonstrate to trainee dental nurses. That really meant a different role totally for me, because these young ladies, they didn't have any idea of anatomy or any physical properties or what dentistry was all about. Whereas with my colleagues, I was at home with them. We spoke the same language and we knew everything. So I really had to dig deep and professionally present those sequences of, we'll say, anatomy and other different subjects, which was totally new to them. The next part is how to form the objectives for the training session. Now, it is necessary to find the objectives for your training session. This objectives leads actually to the lessons that will be needed within it, because the objectives have to be measurable and they have to be realistic. How and what methods to deliver them, we'll deal with that and on. The audience participation with regard to the training, and the effective experience for training. And then we also deal with evaluation. So we just start off with our session this evening of training. John, may I have the next slide, please? The first part of it that I described, now I'm really presenting this as I described a while ago. It is a synopsis. This is a Toastmaster work, and it is supposed to be done over 4 hours, 45 minutes. Now we just have 60 minutes or a little less than that to present this evening. So what I'm doing is presenting a synopsis of it. I will highlight what I drew from the presentation to be effective, etc. So what they describe first of all is a gap analysis. And what that means is to identify what a club should be doing and what they are doing. In other words, let the club list what they are proud of doing, the things that they're very, very happy with and proud of, and then that a club is not happy with. May I have the next slide, John? Now, determine the gap between the current skill level and the required skill. This gap analysis tells us where the club are not happy with some particular thing and what would make them happy or content or fulfilled in a better way. And determining that gap, and one need to describe these actions, the gap needs to be have objectives in it, and they need to be specific and very detailed. They need to be attainable and realistic. And when these are found, or when a club, when a group of trainees come together, it is good for them to do a breakout session in groups of 3 to 5 and let them discuss what within their club are the facilities that they do that they're not proud of or that they're not happy with. Let these be listed, and we use a flip chart to list these so that each member of a group puts up a particular gap, and then that is developed upon. May we have the next slide, John?
Just before you move on, Gerard, I would assume that moments of truth would be a very good vehicle for identifying those gaps.
John, you just jogged my head about that. When I was doing and putting this together, the moments of truth is a real good opener with regard to getting what the club is not happy about or where the club needs to improve. You're 100% correct. And we really need to emphasize that clubs should do the moments of truth, especially in the first half of the year, where they find their weaknesses or where things need to improve or to be corrected. And then in the second half, put these into play and see how they have achieved the realistic improvement thereon. Does that answer your question, John, on that?
Yes, I think it does. To actually look to see whether the actions have been taken and there's some strong evidence of improvement as a result.
Correct, yeah. So we'll go to the next slide, yeah. Now, from those objectives, we go to a lesson plan. And from the objectives is, we'll say a club doesn't run good meetings, for example. There's ineffective, or meetings are a bit sloppy or disorganized. And from that, that is the objective that is it. And that will be the program content. It has to have a well-constructed outline, meaning that it has to be well described what the club is lacking. And it also, the lesson plan gives the people therein self-confidence about it. It also keeps them on track, that they're focused on their objective to achieve this success, and that it achieves, as the latter 6 points says, it achieves the objective, which was the main purpose of what the lesson was about. Let's go to the next slide, John, please.
Could you just give us an example of what you mean by an objective, Gerard?
What I mean by an objective would be
what would be an objective?
an objective would be, just like I mentioned, that a club are not running effective meetings. We'll say the meeting starts late or an agenda is a bit sloppy or whatever. The objective there is to correct that error or that, what would I say, that part of it that they're not happy with or that is not being effectively done. So that is the objective there. You know, that the trainers will do that and come up with a plan for it.
Okay, so that would be written in some kind of expected outcome then?
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A lesson plan. Who is the audience and the topic and content, the location of the session and the time frame of each module and the objectives of the session. Now the audience can be the area directors, division directors, part of the district team. And the topic and content would be the objective that is required to be fulfilled. In other words, if meetings are not being held to the proper level and suitability, that's the content. The location of the session is suitable to who wishes to partake in it. The time frame for each module then, the time frame, Toastmasters recommends that it's 4 hours, 45 minutes. That's what it described in the thing. I would reasonably think that it could be done in about 3 hours. And the objectives of the session are to actually fulfill what is required in the deficiency of that particular club. May I have the next slide, John, please?
Again, Gerard, just before you move on from there, I'm led to believe that some districts are now making club officer training a full day, and in some cases 2 days. So I've actually seen some movement from that half a day.
Yeah, I presume that is something, but also how practical it is, or how available people's time is, John, is another factor.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the issue, isn't it? As we've said, that times are of the essence, and therefore, how much time can people give up?
Yeah.
I'll move you on.
Okay. Now, the different methods of training are, number one, a lecture. Number two would be role play, and an exercise in a breakout group, and a case study. With regard to a lecture, as we know, is a prepared talk. The one thing about a lecture is that it should not be too long, from the point of view that the audience can get weary. Generally, to do a presentation, which is quite proactive, to be about 15 minutes. Bring in one's public speaking skills. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, and then tell them what you told them. In other words, repeat what has been said so that the message gets through. Also, the style is not to stand by the lectern, involve oneself with the audience. Now, tonight, it's kind of a different situation than being at a training session. We do not have eye contact, both the audience and myself. And also, it is recommended not to be just reading from the script that one has, and to do personalized stories within the content of the lecture also. Now, with regard to the presentation, it is good to have visual aids because they act as a memory stimulus. Also, it is good to have handouts during the procedure of the lecture. Ask some questions because it stimulates and keeps the participants and the trainees involved in the program. Now, with regard to a role play, role plays need to be rehearsed prior with, we'll say, 2 people. And the objective of a role play is that it has a lesson to teach the trainees. and that the trainees recognize what this lesson is. And then they're broken into different groups, we say groups of 3 or 5 again, and come up with a solution to what the role play has been about. We'll say they complain about the Sergeant at Arms. For example, the Sergeant at Arms has not the room set up timely for the meeting to start. So that interaction, the audience, one group can resolve how it will be done, another group can make suggestions as to what is happening, so that there's a general feedback. That also should be recorded on the flip chart so that people can make notes on it and learn from the presentation. On playing the scene, it is necessary that the participants know what is going on and that there is a definite outcome with regard to it. Now, with regard to the other situation where a training method can be is a case study. We take, for example, there can be a presentation, it can be read out, or it can be described on a video with regard to it. And then there's a breakout into groups also, so that the trainees can make a report on that as to what they will see as a resolution to the problem within the case study. Demonstration. This is with regard to demonstrating a particular situation where the club or some part of the club is not behaving itself in the appropriate way. Now, there's also, with regard to an exercise on this, there's right down at the end of my screen, there's a recap an excellent trainer. What this has to do with is that somewhere along the course of our life, it either be in Toastmasters or prior to Toastmasters, where we had, we might recall, an excellent teacher. And every part of it was very well retained, and it was very, very stimulating. So that as such, there were lessons to be learned from that person. Like, they presented it with a very, very amount of input. They had a style that was good. They introduced humor. And like, this was an example or an emulation where a person would wish to be as good as that particular person. So they described that particular, what makes a good presenter, what makes a good trainer, and how the actual content also of it keeps people stimulated and alive within the thing. Now, there's another point of view that they mention also with regard to it. We take, for example, when we are at school, the teacher teaches us. A trainer is not a teacher. From the point of view of that, when we are pupils at our school, we hear the word being taught to us. Because of the, I suppose, the innocence of childhood, etc., we do not have life experience. We take what we get from the teacher and absorb that and learn it. Whereas with regard to adult group sessions and training, it is very, very much different, because the adult has life experience, so they bring that to the meeting. They also have the choices, they have decision, and they can bring that into what has been a participation. So that we as trainers are not teachers to a certain extent. We need to interact with it. We need our audience to feed back to us, and that we can discuss situations and bring the thing to, with regard to the objectives that have to be done, that they're realistic and that they're practical and that they're measurable also to a certain extent. Well, let's go to another slide, John.
Just before you move away from there, Gerard, under your number 3 exercise group breakout, would things like questionnaires be useful?
Questionnaires, by all means, that would be very useful. In what way would you describe questionnaires? Printed questionnaires, John, or just to...
Questionnaires that would enable people to focus and debate particular topics.
Sure, yes, without a doubt, yeah.
The question is like, you know, how do we get more members? How do we get more engagement in pathways? You know, those kind of questions to prompt people to come up with some thoughts.
Very, very correct. Yeah, yeah. That's what I was speaking about a while ago, where you asked me about, like, we'll say about what ways can we get more people to join and enroll in in pathways. You know, that would be the objective with regard to that. How do we get more members to our club? That's another objective with regard to it. Do you get my point that way?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Let's see what the next slide tells us. John?
Yeah, I've moved it on.
Oh, great. Yeah, yeah. Now, facilitation techniques.
That's answered my question.
Pardon?
That answered my question.
That's right, asking questions with regard to, you know, letting questions be open. The questions can be introduced during the course of a lecture or during the thing. There can be a breakout with regard to what people think, or maybe get a question from the audience as to what is coming back. That actually provides us with a feedback from that situation. A feedback can also be broken into groups, and where there's a leader of the group, that they make a consensus and give a report back to the whole audience. That actually interplays, because not alone one group benefits from it, the other groups that are within the presentation also hear what has been from one particular group or another particular group also. Now, the effective use of visual aids with regard to that, and flip charts. Visual aids can be very, very useful, and they need to be, we say, readable or quite clear. The use of flip charts also is very useful. And the recommendation there is that mainly always use black felt pen on a white background. This gives far clarity, and that the letters should be large enough so that they can be read, and a printed type of one.
I was told never to use a green felt tip pen.
Sorry?
Never use a green felt tip pen.
I presume, yes, yeah. So with regard to then item number 4 are projector screens and slides. They tell quite a lot. They're actually, they give, like we have our experience here with regard to, they give the focus, and then it needs meat on the bone with regard to telling the story of it thereafter. Slides, and people, like, not everybody might be used to doing a PowerPoint and doing a presentation. That could be part of another objective with regard to that. Teaching a person, training people how to do those kind of different things that happens in Toastmasters. The journey in Toastmasters is phenomenal with regard to the amount of extracurricular stuff that one learns. Like, not alone do we get our voice and get confidence in voice, do we do communication with regard to that, and then also we have the leadership part of it. Part of the leadership of Toastmasters is to be able to train other people with regard to how to train our fellow officers, also with regard to training club officers. That is so vital. I feel it should be coming at the beginning of a year. As soon as we're into the 1st of July, I think there should be something quite early with regard to training club officers, because as you said, John, right in the introduction, it isn't until you're about 6 months actually into it that you get to know the language, the different aspects of Toastmasters, the different behaviors as to how it happens. And then there's quite a lot of language that is short, abbreviated type of stuff. COT, people call it COT, DOT, like club officer training, district officer training. Like, at this stage, we take it for granted that those things are there, but it is like I described about the nurses and teaching the nurses. Like, one is always throw out the basics and never be shy of it. Always accept that people don't know stuff, even that it is repeated. There's always something extra that will be in the repetition of finding out more information on that. With regard to a video can be used there are many videos available from Toastmasters. Also, from point number 4, there are some slides available by Toastmasters that can be used in a PowerPoint. My comment on this is, from what I've hear from a lot of people, is that they kind of describe it a bit too Americanized, and we kind of all know what that is, and we respect the Americans also by saying stuff like that. Kind of what suits us doesn't suit them, and vice versa. So a video can be presented with regard to, you know, how a guest is greeted at a club meeting, and what went wrong, what was the interaction, etc. And then that video stops, and there's a breakout and a discussion with regard to it afterwards, and people come back in their different groups again, like a while ago, feeding back as to why one person did this and how the guest was treated and what the reaction of the guest also was. Now, the last point is handouts, and John, that would be almost something similar to your questions also. With regard to handouts, these can be just a synopsis of what is, you know, what has partaken in the course of the training. And many handouts, you know, they don't need to be too long. Some handouts are never looked at, and some just are taken home. They stay in the folder that they're being put into, and that is it. But they need to be supportive for what has happened during the course of the presentation. With regard to, have you any comment on any of those, John, there on that?
So I was just wondering about divisions and areas running their own webinars. Is that something that would be practical?
Practical is, well, it's a great suggestion, John, you know, from the point of view of, you know, facilitating, etc. number 1. Then, like, one often kind of reads success with regard to how many people attend, you know. In my own life of sending out reminders, etc., we always thought that if we got 14%, we were doing very well as a response. But as such, with regard to webinars, John, we know it in the district, there isn't a great attendance. But for those, like, also, I think it would find there's a repeat attendance. Those are the same characters that tend to come back the whole time. There are those who actually are forward thinking and are keen to learn. And, well, they're getting the nurture that they deserve and that they wish to have, you know. But with regard to, it would be a marvelous exercise from the point of view of getting it in area and divisions, because, again, it teaches another discipline of the Toastmaster journey.
I know that there are quite a few videos available on the District 71 website. And I know when I did Finance Manager, I did a webinar on how to claim expenses. And I think quite a lot of people actually found that extremely useful, certainly those people that were getting expenses from Toastmasters.
Sure,
so there are lots of things that we could do via webinars. One that always stands out with me is understanding the Toastmasters International dashboard. There are a lot of people get into club officer roles and have never ever ventured into that area and have never actually looked at the dashboard or interpreted it in any way. So I think that those kind of topics would lend themselves to webinars, and of course they're there in perpetuity, aren't they? People can listen to them at any time. You know, a webinar isn't just about the people that attend on the night. The fact that people can dip into it and have a look at any time.
And are we promoting it enough, John, that they're available?
Probably not. I think there are lots of things that are available not only on our District 71 site, but certainly on Toastmasters International. You've mentioned the fact that there are videos, that there are presentations that you can tap into. I'm not convinced that everybody is aware of them. Maybe we need to do more in terms of promoting what information is out there and how to get access to it.
Sure, yeah. I presume we might just talk about, before we go on to our next slide is on evaluation, and we don't want to go to evaluation just so quickly at the moment. And as my synopsis is, I have taken some notes, and if we can just visualize a training session, we'll say a sample training session plan. And the title of this training session plan is How to Conduct effective meetings. Okay, how to conduct effective meetings. And the objectives of this at the end of the session is to plan and prepare for meetings more effectively, develop an agenda, list 5 common problems that throw meetings off track. So the objectives, those 3 objectives just being outlined there, just only 3 objectives. How much, information is needed to come out of that, out of those there. Plan and prepare for meetings more effective, like plan a meeting and prepare a meeting. And then developing on the agenda, like what an agenda can be lacking. Does it have the branding? Does it have the time? Does it have the mission statement? Does it have the date of the next meeting? How informative is it? And then list 5 common problems that throw meetings off of track. We'll say meetings don't start punctually and they don't finish punctually, and that can be a great annoyance to many people. Also, with regard to people getting slot times for doing speeches, how many people don't want to do roles within a meeting, just only want to do speeches. So there's got to be a balance with regard to things like that. They describe that the sample training would be presentation of 4 hours, as you said, John, already, about half a day. And then there's a presenter appointed for it. And the equipment that's needed, as we've described already, is a data projector, a screen, the flip chart, and stand. So that, and our target population then, as we just described already and discussed, is that it could be the area, a division, it could be within district officers, it is different public targets. That's great. Let's go and feel our way to the next slide, John, please. Evaluation. This is a questionnaire that is given out at the end of the meeting. And feedback, again, is like what I just described about the agenda a while ago. It depends on what is on the paper. It needs to describe or ask questions about the program itself. Number 2, about the presenter. And number 3, the participants, how they were fulfilled within the presentation. The program, was the program well laid out? Did it have effective slides? Did it have effective information being presented? Were the breakout sessions productive? Then with regard to the presenter, did he come across as communicating with the trainees and with the audience? Was the presenter reading the thing the whole time? Because that is quite dry, from the point of view that it is good to be interactive with people. So that then with regard to participants, that's the most important thing of all. Were the participants happy with what went on? Because as such, like that is the key message of stimulus from the point of view of training. Like when we are in the situation of training people, we want them to move on, just not listen to it, go out the door, forget about it. They need to put it into practice. And we need the whole time trainers. Not alone do we need trainers, we need excellent trainers. Because by training people, we stimulate them and we give them the encouragement, the knowledge and the wherewithal. And it is so difficult to, we'll say, find the beginning and the end of all that, because within also a program, one can saturate the audience or the trainee from the point of view of that, over information can be just drowning and people just get a bit exhausted from it. Another point that I read in the presentation was with regard to the room, the layout of the room. That is just very, very vital. Depending on the number, it can be like a horseshoe around a table, where we'll say 6 or 8 people can sit and the projector is there from them. Then if you have, we'll say, an audience of 20, 30, whatever. They're broken down where there are table, chairs, etc., and maybe about 5, 6 people at each table, and that they're all in a perfect view of the screen, etc. Very important to just watch the venue, that there are pillars or poles just interrupting and blocking people's view, that they're at a comfort with regard to watching the program. Then the other aspect that one needs to take into account, and especially if it is going into an afternoon, that the actual be aware as a presenter that the temperature of the room doesn't become too warm, from the point of view that people after lunchtime tend to go asleep a little bit and are not as focused. So that's a point of view, like one managing the atmosphere and the environment of where the meeting is taking place is another very, very important thing to observe. Have you any comment on those, John?
Yeah, I was going to ask the value of having scoring on the evaluation sheets. So, you know, against each of the main headings, you have a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 scoring. And also comments. You want people to give you some feedback on their particular views and comments and ideas for improvement. Would we want that?
Very much so, yes. Yeah, like each of those would be developed on that, so that you're really developing that. It wasn't pointed out in the actual evaluation to do a scoring, but a scoring is a very, very good thing, you know, like a scoring from 1 to 10 or something like that, you know, where 1 is at a very low end and 10 is at excellent. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the interesting things with Pathways evaluations with their scoring is that it actually forces you to not give everybody a 5. It forces you to recognize that there is room for improvement, and then you have to identify what that room for improvement is. And I think the same thing would apply here, isn't it? If you don't score, if you did have a 1 to 5 scoring and you didn't score it 5, then what would be your reasoning behind that, and what would you recommend to help us get it better next time? Because if you bear in mind is that we run club officer training twice a year, we do it every year, and we really ought to learn from that about how we actually make it a better session next time we run it.
Yeah. That's the key thing always, John, is that we're learning and we've got to be open to learn. You know, like at the initial stage of, we'll say, any particular situation, like it's like Toastmasters, you know, that one is in a different role each year if they so wanted. And by the time you're really, really familiar with a role, it's time to move on, you know, which is kind of ironic to a certain degree. But, you know, that's the way that it just works, you know, and as such, one tries to improve oneself all the time. Yeah.
It's one of the weaknesses of Toastmasters, but it's also one of the benefits, isn't it? One of the success.
It is, yeah, because as such, when I had in my work life and in other situations, in voluntary situations, as being chairperson, I operated a 3-year cycle, okay? And a 3-year was, the first year was pre, then the year one was, we'll say, for example, chairman or president, and then the year after was supporting the person who was in office, you know, so that, because you have some people hogging the thing, you know, or hugging it is maybe a better word, that they're in kind of like finance club officer, because they know how to send the stuff to TI, etc. So they're retained. They may have the bank account also, and all that is kind of much more difficult now. So that people, that kind of role has been a bit of a fever at different times. You know. Let's feel our next slide, John. And
you were going to, Gerard, before we move on to there, you were going to talk a little bit about some of the subjects that you think we ought to be delivering at club officer training. I think
that's right,
wasn't it?
Yeah, I had that, and with regard to club officer training, and like we just applied this to our training facility for club officers. What I would first of all suggest is just have an ear to the ground or observation what has been happening within that club as you club visit, and what the weaknesses therein are. One, you know, I or John or any of the district team or anybody else can be suggesting do this, that, or the other thing. But where a weakness is in a club or where something is needed in a club, I think that's the #1 topic that should be addressed. and that's one of the items that should be. Now, with regard to, we obviously have the hot potato at the moment is the pathways. Like there's some people that are, I won't say reserved, but they're just, we'll say cautious, or to a certain degree, some people rejecting, but they're very, very few on the ground. I think people will adopt the pathways in due course. Now, with regard to pathways and a presentation on pathways, I think it should deal with some aspect of it. Let it be concise and precise, and maybe just the initial stage of it, because we have many people who have taken on pathways and have gone into different levels at this stage in time, so that it is not like that it is, you know, new in the scene. With regard to the different roles of club officers, that sometimes can be a topic that would need to be discussed. With regard to the other aspect of what should be in club officer training would be contests. And let's take contests in the many aspects of a contest. We have the contest chair. That program should be looked into as to how a contest is run well, because that is very, very vital. Like, people need to be trained into how to organize and how to make out all the different paperwork that is required to be the club contest chair. Then we have the role of chief judge as to what is required for that, and the different responsibilities. Then there's the guideline that's needed for judging. I think that possibly this could happen at meetings, from the point of view of that they could have judging on a particular speech that has been done, just an example speech, and how to break down the different aspects of it. Because, you know, some people, and I don't know, I think Toastmasters always kind of gets it right. The winner always comes out on top, so generally anyway, my comment on it. But it is good to have those people trained on that. Some aspects of Toastmasters also that are not maybe brought up at training would be how to get more members to our club. Do we have open nights? Do we have open nights suggesting 2 times a year? Are the open nights well organized? Are they planned ahead of time? Are different social media involved with regard to Facebook, Eventbrite? What works within that community? Maybe it might be just quite a rural community, where I find quite effective would be advertising in a local magazine of advertising, and also with regard to shops and different offices where a poster can be put up. Of course, also can't be neglected is the word of mouth regard to getting more members. That kind of summarizes, or it doesn't make a summary, there's a list a mile long, other things that could happen within club officer training. Have you any, John, my head is saturated at the moment, have you any other suggestion?
Well, I suppose we're back to the fact that if you've only got a half a day to play around with, there's not an awful lot of things that you can fit into that half day. And,
No.
and the important bit is look at the priorities.
Yeah.
I would encourage area directors and division directors to look back at area director visit reports. Are there some common themes coming out there? Certainly some of the things that I've seen have been around signposting, you know, people not able to find out where the meeting's taking place, how easy it is to find the club, how easy it to find the club in terms of search engines. So if you're Googling for public speaking, how easy is it for your club to actually appear there? So there's quite a few things around that. Certainly,
Sure.
you mentioned growing members and guests and open nights. I think there's always some scope for how do we run those better? How do we get more people coming along to our clubs? I'd question conversion as well. You know, certainly some of the clubs that I belong to, we're quite good at getting visitors there. We're not so good at converting them into members. You know, maybe some questions around how do we improve that? I think in some cases we actually don't ask them to join. You know, we wait for them to ask to join.
That's right. There's a shyness about moving that question.
Yeah, so I think there's more that we could do there. I mentioned earlier on about understanding the Toastmasters International dashboard and interpreting that dashboard in terms of looking at how well is your club doing. You've mentioned moments of truth. I think there's a lot that can be learned from how do we make better use of that and how do we implement the things there. And I'm a big believer in continuous improvement. You know, how do we make every one of our clubs 10% better than it was last year? You know, I think those kind of things I would look at. And how do we ensure that our members are getting what they want out of their membership? You know, we still have an issue worldwide on member retention. Is there more that we can do to try and hang on to the members that we've got? I know that I've been asked to do something at our area meeting next time, our area officer training on sustainability. You know, how do we ensure that our clubs are around in 30 years time or 50 years time? You know, and that's the challenge, I think, of regenerating the club every time we bring a new set of officers in. You know, certainly succession planning is an issue, and that's going to crop up fairly soon. So there's lots of topics that we could really get into.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of subjects. The only shortage we have is time.
Yeah. And, you know, not alone getting into the dashboard, but can people get into the TI website? You know, can they do that, you know? And is their email address appropriate? You know, that arose itself recently with me. You know?
Yeah, I was Toastmaster of the evening in our club last night. I was thrown in at short notice. And, you know, one of the things that was interesting there is people are thrown in at short notice, but and if they're fairly new to the club, they haven't had time to investigate the role or to research the role. So where can people pick up that information that if they do get thrown in at the deep end, that they've at least got some content that gives them some guidance on those meeting roles?
Yeah. And also not alone being thrown in at the deep end like that, getting to know the audience that are there also, you know, because new members come along and it's nice to be able to know people and to be able to greet them, you know. That is another aspect of it, that name badges are very essential at a club.
Well, not only name badges for the people that are coming in as visitors, but name badges of who's there. I noticed that one of the things that a lot of clubs don't do that well is introducing visitors to the officers. But of course, a lot of visitors turn up at the last minute, so you don't really have a good deal of time to do that.
Yeah.
So some real challenges, I think.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty. And as you described, it's find out from, like, I describe it as local, and that local means what the area directors have found at the club visits and the division directors of it. So then also with regard to the format of the club officer training, it can happen in each area, or else it can be a group one to be organized in division level. One of the things in sending out the notice of the meeting, it's good to have a feedback on the training. It's good to have a feedback that who is attending, have they received the message, did they get it? That's number one. And who is coming, etc. And does the date suit them? Because it's hard to assemble everybody. And what that does is, by doing that, actually avoids, and we'll say creates less of a mop-up situation afterwards. Would you agree with that, John?
Sorry, I missed that, Gerard.
Sorry, no, that, you know, that we try and maximize the amount of people that attend club officer training so that there isn't a follow-up afterwards as a mop-up situation.
Yeah, I think that you're right, but inevitably you're always going to get some people that have got something else on, that they've got a holiday, or that they've got
yeah, they've got a holiday. They can be ill, you know, something. There can be anything that can crop up. Yes, a death in the family.
Again, I know some districts have got an incentive for getting all 7 officers there to training. You know, maybe it's something that's worth thinking about, offering that within the club, or within the area, or within the division.
And not alone is it the officers, that the 7 officers be there, but invite members also.
Yes.
Because that's an education to them, and to an exposure. It gives them a feedback, and also it has got a social networking.
Yeah, in one of our clubs, we've actually stopped calling it club officer training, because there's a danger that if you call it club officer training, they think it's only for club officers. So we've tried to focus on training in general.
Just training. Yeah, that's a very, very good suggestion.
Club officers there, but we'd like to get other people along, because if you're thinking about an officer role in the future, this is the chance to come along and find out more about it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, time is coming on, Gerard. So
let's just go to that other slide, and I'll just, it is where I came from. Guidelines for this presentation are available in digital from Toastmasters International, from the speaker to trainer manual, and it is item 257. I ordered it myself, and it cost $25. I think our next slide is just questions, John. So as you mentioned, it's time for questions. Yeah, please. So that, have you had any questions?
At this moment in time, we haven't had anybody there, but if people want to put their hand up in the control panel, I will unmute them so as they can ask a question of you or of I, Gerard. At the moment, we have no burning questions, but hopefully somebody will put their hand up in a minute. Just before somebody does do that, is that what sort of notice should we give people of a forthcoming webinar or event or training session? Do you think that we tend to not give people enough notice? I know some people actually queried us running tonight's on a Wednesday, on a Tuesday, because it would clash with club meetings.
It would clash with club meetings, but it's generally available time. This weekend we have a midterm training, so that kind of ruled that out. And that availability, and also the question is, what night suits people best, or what time of the week suits people best? Is a Sunday evening good? Is a Saturday morning a good time? A Friday night, that kind of thing? They are days that are free of a Toastmaster commitment or, you know, attending. But then it is every second week that generally that people have a club meeting. With regard to this particular one now, myself being involved with it and the organizing of it, like, it came to fruit in the beginning of December that we would be planning it. And there was another webinar on, I think it was the 17th of December, that we had on how the part of it that I did, guests and things, it was to how members increase our members. But that came in at the 17th of December. So at that particular stage in time, it was too near Christmas to advertise it, because it would just go lazy, you know, and that was just a personal reason. So it was just already advertised a week ago, which may be short in my thing and my thinking, but you know, that's just it. Yeah.
We found Saturdays are often better than Sundays, but I guess that varies around the country and around differently in Ireland and differently in the UK. We tend to find a lot of people use Sundays as a family day, so it's often difficult to get people there on a Sunday, whereas Saturday's a little bit. But of course, it clashes with sport on a Saturday. There's never a perfect time, is there?
It's not a perfect, but you know, the sport would be more on the Saturday afternoon. Whereas, like, if there was a slot on a Saturday morning, it might be a suggestion. But you know, that would be a good feedback at some stage. Maybe when we do district officer training, what is a suitable time for people, kind of getting one feedback on what would be a good time. Yeah.
Adrian Herbert has put he hasn't put a question, but he's put a pointer, and that is, I prefer webinars not to occur on Sundays. So that's an interesting bit. You know, maybe we should try Saturdays, a Saturday morning. We have our DLT meetings on Saturday morning, and that seems to work. But we could try webinars on a Saturday morning. So thank you, Adrian, for that comment. I've not got any other comments in at the moment.
Saturday morning would be a good time. Also, the possibility of a Friday night mightn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, I think we just have to play around with things, don't we?
Yeah, because Saturday night then is a social night. People tend to, you know, either meet or get out or go for a meal or whatever. You know, that's a family commitment or a social time. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on about people's attention span, because I think that's important. I mean, certainly when we put on our district officer training, we have about a half an hour slot each, and we try to make that 10 minutes presentation and 20 minutes audience participation, and I think that's a good time scale. I was always told that people's attention span was about 10 minutes, so anything that goes on beyond 10 minutes, you're going to start losing people. I think about keeping things simple as well, is that if there's too much, you mentioned jargon, and we've got a lot of jargon in Toastmasters. We've got a lot of 3-letter acronyms, haven't we, or 2-letter acronyms, and maybe we need to try and get rid of some of that jargon.
Well, I think both could be included, John. You know, like if it is the written word, rather than writing down, one could write down district officer training and club officer training with COT after, you know, so that people know what it is, because it's a thing that slips them out without realizing it.
Well, and the other thing as well with an audience is that we don't know what they don't know. And there's an assumption, isn't it? Well, they should know that, shouldn't they? And in many cases, they probably don't.
Yeah.
So we really do need to make sure we clearly understand the level of knowledge and understanding of our audience. And you know, and getting the balance right, isn't it? We don't want to talk down to them, but also we don't want to be too highfalutin that they don't understand what we're talking about. So it's getting that balance right.
Yeah. Because just like any typical class, you know, there are different grades where people are at different levels, you know.
Not got any more questions in at the moment.
Or any comments on anything? Yeah.
No more comments at the moment. You mentioned again about room layout, and I think that again is quite important, isn't it? Is that if you want to get audience participation, and if you want to get audience sharing information with each other, then the layout can be quite critical. The problem with having the sort of U shape is that you've only got one person either side of you to chat to, and you can see the people over the other side of the U. I'm a great lover in seminar type work, in workshop type activities of the cabaret style, you know, that circular table with about 6 people, 7 people sat around it. I think that tends to work, and it gets people working in groups and sharing ideas and coming up with suggestions.
And that is almost in a kind of a chevron style, you know, that is in a sort of a V as they go down the center of the room, you know, so that they're on both sides if that kind of numbers are there. Yeah. Also, it gives flexibility to the presenter to kind of be able to walk towards the groups, you know, and be able to facilitate them when the breakouts are happening, or hear how their discussions are, or add something to them, or, you know, be partaking. Yeah.
There was something else that was coming to mind as you were mentioning that as well, and I think that bit about right at the beginning, is it worth us asking the delegates what they want out of the program? Because that does help us to understand some of the issues and challenges that they're facing. So maybe right at the very beginning is to get some clarity around anything that they particularly want us to cover. Then at the end of the session is to say, did we address that?
Sure.
You know, have we addressed those questions?
You know, that could go a step further again. Actually, when the notice is sent out about, I know it is just a link to a webinar, but when the notice is sent out, it should go by email, or maybe we could have a constant contact as to what people want, you know, from the particular topic that's being presented.
Yeah, I think the more we can understand the audience's wants and needs, the better chance we've got of designing the program to meet those wants and needs. And it's like everything else, isn't it? We need to ask the questions. What do people want to get out of this, and how do we try and cater for that in the session that we're running, or in the sessions that we're running?
Because different people have different requirements. Yeah.
And as I said, is that we often don't know what they know and what they don't know.
All don't have the same type of strength, and maybe some people were, you know, more, what would I say, attracted to one particular aspect and didn't kind of dig out the other bit, you know, so that it brings a kind of a balance to the whole aspect of it. Like, and there's, as I mentioned also, there's never any harm in repeating something, because you'll always pick up just something extra therein, you know.
Yes, and if you think about it, you mentioned it in the design of speeches, is that we tell them what we're going to tell them, we tell them, and then we tell them what we've told them. You know, that kind of repetition is the stuff that drives things home. I'm always amazed as well with adults is that that sort of fear of asking questions is that as a grandfather at the moment, I'm just intrigued at the amount of questions that small children ask. And we tend to knock that out of people as they get older, don't we?
Oh, very, very much so, yes.
And we really, you know, I was always told that you should always be inquisitive, that, you know, why do we do that? And is there a better way of doing it? And can we do that better? That kind of inquisitiveness is the thing that actually teaches you stuff, isn't it? You learn from asking those kind of questions. And that's how children learn so much in their early stages of growing up, of course.
But, you know, learning any subject or any topic by actually being a trainer or a mentor for it or whatever, that's the time you learn most.
Yes.
Because one has to research that subject, etc., and be in a situation to present it. And, you know, that it really sharpens up one's knowledge of a subject then as to how it should be done or how it behaves, etc. Yeah.
One of my big learning points in recent years is that most of the workshops I used to run were a day long. And we decided to start putting some of that content on video. And of course, you know, the average video probably wants to be less than an hour. So we were looking at how do we take a day's worth of material and condense it down into sort of 30 minutes or 45 minutes in video. Yeah. So you really start to focus on the nice to knows and the need to knows. You know, maybe that again in terms of training design is what do people need to know and what is nice to know. And if you've got to trim stuff out, get rid of the nice to know and focus on the need to know stuff.
Because that's the same as tonight's presentation. You know, it is a synopsis of what's going on because there's a workbook and there's presentation. It needs slides, it needs a development. But at least we've kind of brought the training to our members, etc. And you know, that's one good thing. Yeah.
Well, it's 9 o'clock, Gerard. We don't have any more questions. I've got Mick White has thanked us for the presentation. If people have got questions following on to this event, they can drop you or I or both of us an email and we'll try and endeavour to answer those. So if I can thank you, Gerard, for giving up your time this evening, and thanks for that interaction between the two of us. Hopefully people have found that helpful.
Yeah.
And keep an eye open for the next webinar. We're planning to run at least a couple of webinars every month on sort of hot topics for club officers and for area and division directors.
The next topic that I'll be doing will be pathways, and that will be in February, in the beginning of February sometime.
Okay, that'd be great, Sir Gerard, and we'll look forward to hearing that.
Yeah.
So if I can thank you again for your participation this evening, and thanks to all those people that have come on board, and we look forward to seeing you certainly at the end of January if you're a division director or an area director, and looking forward to that. Thanks, Gerard.
John, the very same to you. Thank you for that participation and also the support that you gave in that and the introduction.
Thanks so much.
And I want to say good night to everybody and thank you for attending.
Yeah, good night everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening.